Wyoming Territory, July 1879. The sun beat down hard on the sagebrush flats just south of the Wind River Range, the heat drawing sweat from Marigold Lane's brow as she wrestled with the iron wheel rim on her busted wagon. Her hands were scraped raw, her skirts dusty and torn at the hem, but she kept at it, jaw set, mouth dry, heart pounding. The wheel had cracked crossing a rocky creek bed that morning, and she had been fighting it alone ever since. She glanced up once at the empty stretch of trail behind her, hoping for a rider, any rider. But there was nothing but dust, wind, and sky. She wiped her palms on her apron, then crouched again beside the axle. "You are either the bravest woman I've ever seen," a voice said behind her, "or the most stubborn." She spun around, startled, hand flying to the small knife tucked in her boot. A man sat tall in the saddle a few feet off, rein slack in one hand. He had a sun-worn face, a clean-shaven jaw, and eyes the color of river rock. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, revealing strong forearms, and his dark hair curled slightly under the rim of his hat. "I mean no harm," he said gently, dismounting. "Name's Silas Whitlow." Marigold stood slowly, dusting her hands. "Marigold Lane." He nodded once, eyes flicking to the cracked wheel. "Looks like you could use a hand." "I can manage," she said, voice tight. He tilted his head a little, studying her. "Maybe, but I have tools. And 2 hands. It would go faster." She hesitated. She had not trusted a man in years, not since her husband died in Kansas and left her a widow with nothing but debts and a mule. But she wasn't foolish either. She needed to get to Lander before sundown, and she needed that will fix to do it. Marigold stepped aside. "All right." Silas went straight to work, pulling a small tool roll from his saddlebag. He did not ask questions. He did not offer small talk. Just worked alongside her with quiet focus, his hands sure, his movements steady. She handed him the iron nails when he asked, held the wheel steady as he braced it, and for the first time in days, she felt the tightness in her chest ease just slightly. By the time the sun began to dip toward the mountains, the wheel was whole again. Silas stood, brushing the dust from his trousers, and looked at her not with pity, not with judgment, but with something softer. "You traveling alone?" he asked. Marigold nodded. "Heading to Lander. My sister's there." "You are a long way off still." "I know." He looked at the horizon, then back at her. "You should not be out here alone. It is not safe." She crossed her arms, straightened her shoulders. "I do not have much of a choice." He studied her for a long moment, then said, "I have been riding this trail 3 days, and I have not seen a soul worth speaking to. Then I find you, fixing your wagon like you were born to it." He took a step closer. "I have been waiting for a woman like you." Marigold blinked, caught off guard. "You do not even know me." "I know enough. You are strong. You do not scare easy, and that matters to me." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat tightened, not from fear, but from something deeper. Because it had been so long since someone saw her. Really saw her. "I have not heard something kind in a long time," she said quietly. Silas's voice dropped. "Then let me be the first of many." They stood there in the cooling light, the wagon casting a long shadow behind them. A breeze stirred the dust, tugging at the loose strands of her hair. Silas looked at her like he meant every word. "I have a small camp half a mile back," he said. "Clean water, firewood. We can rest there tonight, and I can ride with you to Lander in the morning, if you will let me." Marigold hesitated, but only for a moment. Something about the way he spoke low and steady, without pressure, eased the fear that usually lived behind her ribs. "All right," she said. "But I am not helpless. I never thought you were." They hitched the mule and walked side by side through the dusk, the wagon creaking softly behind them. When they reached the camp, Silas made coffee over a small fire, and Marigold sat nearby, watching the flames dance. "You said you were waiting for someone like me," she murmured. "What did you mean?" He stirred the coffee, then poured 2 tin cups. "I have known women who were beautiful, women who were clever, but I have never known one who could look this world in the eye and not flinch." He handed her a cup. "That kind of strength. It is rare." Marigold looked down at the drink in her hands. Her eyes burned, but she did not cry. She had done enough of that in her life. Instead, she took a slow sip and said, "I buried a husband in Kansas. Died of fever. Left me with nothing but debts and a wagon I could barely pull." Silas nodded, quiet. I kept going because I had to, not because I wanted to. Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You do not have to keep going alone. Her breath caught. They did not speak much more that night, but when she laid down on the bedroll he offered, just beside his, she felt something stir in her chest. Not fear, not grief, hope. When morning came, they left together, her wagon rolling steady, his horse trotting beside them. And when they passed the last ridge before Lander, she glanced at him, and he was already looking at her. Not with questions, but with promise. The trail into Lander sloped gently eastward, the land flattening into dry meadows patched with wild sunflower and purple vetch. The wagon creaked over a rutted path, and the mule's ears twitched against the low drone of summer flies. Silas rode just ahead, rein slack, his eyes scanning the horizon. Marigold sat on the bench seat, back straight, hands firm on the brake lever. She hadn't spoken much since they left camp, and he hadn't pressed her. They reached the edge of town by late morning. Modest buildings stretched along a single dusty street. A general store, a livery with its gates wide open, a smithy hammering something unseen behind his wall of smoke. A boy chased a dog past a row of rail-tied hitch posts, and a pair of older men sat playing checkers in the shade of the mercantile eaves. Where's your sister live? Silas asked, drawing his horse even with the wagon as they crossed into town. South End, near the cottonwoods, she said. She keeps bees. Has a sign out front. Silas nodded. I'll ride with you to the gate. They passed slowly through the street, drawing a few looks, not sharp ones, nor curious, just the kind that come when strangers roll in together. Marigold felt their glances settle on her, but they didn't weigh the way they once had. She kept her chin level, eyes forward. Her sister's house stood beyond the last row of shops, nestled behind a weathered fence with a painted sign that read, Lane Apiary. The scent of old timber and honey hung in the air. A skein of smoke curled from a stovepipe, and a broad-shouldered woman stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a flower-streaked apron. Marigold, she called, voice catching with disbelief. Marigold climbed down from the wagon before the mule even stopped moving. Susanna. They met in the middle of the yard, arms wrapped around each other, so tight it nearly knocked the breath from both of them. When they stepped back, Susanna's eyes searched hers with a kind of wonder. I thought you were still in Kansas, she whispered. How did you? I'll explain later, Marigold said. I made it. Silas had dismounted quietly and stood a few paces back, his hat in hand. Susanna's gaze flicked to him. This is Silas Whitlow, Marigold said, her voice steady. He helped me. I wouldn't be here without him. Susanna gave him a measured nod. Well, Mr. Whitlow, you're welcome here. Silas dipped his head. Appreciate that, ma'am. They brought the wagon around to the shed behind the house. Silas helped unhitch the mule and led it to water while Marigold and Susanna went inside. The small kitchen smelled of yeast and rosemary. A kettle hissed on the stove. Susanna poured water into a crock. You look leaner than last year, she said, glancing sideways. But stronger too. Marigold smoothed her skirt as she dropped into a chair. I had to be. Susanna sat across from her. You trust this man? Marigold's fingers brushed the rim of her cup. I didn't think I could trust anyone again. But he never asked for anything. Helped me like it was nothing. Susanna watched her a moment. You speak different when you talk about him. I know. They fell quiet until the back door creaked, and Silas entered with a nod. Mules settled. Wagon solid. Susanna stood. There's bread and butter if you're hungry. You've earned it. He gave a quiet thanks and sat down across from Marigold. She passed him a slice of bread without a word. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods, Marigold stepped out to the bee yard. The hives stood in neat rows, their boxes painted different colors to help the bees find home. She watched them work, moving with such purpose it made her chest ache. Silas joined her, arms folded. Never seen bees kept like this. They belong to our father, she said. Susanna learned the tending. I never did. He studied the hives, then turned to her. What will you do now? She took a breath. I thought I'd stay a while. Help Susanna. Rest. Maybe take up sewing again. He watched her carefully. And after? I don't know yet. They stood in silence, the bees humming like a distant song. Then Marigold turned toward him. You said something before. About waiting for a woman like me. I meant it. She stepped closer, her voice soft. Then wait a little longer. I will. He didn't reach for her, didn't press. Just nodded once, sure and steady. That night, Susanna made stew, and they ate by lamplight. The house was small, but it held warmth. When Marigold showed Silas the spare cot in the shed out back, he thanked her without fuss. She paused at the doorway, hand on the frame. You'll stay a while then? She asked. If you want me to. She didn't answer with words, only a quiet nod, and then she left the door open behind her. 2 days passed beneath the cottonwoods, the air warm but not stifling, the sky holding steady in its blue. Marigold spent the mornings helping Susanna with the hives, learning to move with the same slow surety the bees did. Her hands, still bearing the memory of splinters and iron, began to take to the small, careful work of uncapping combs and fitting new frames. She didn't speak much during those hours, but neither did she feel the need to. Silas kept to the edge of the yard during the day, working with the mule, mending a cracked rail near the shed, stacking wood without being asked. He didn't hover. He didn't watch her like she might break. When they crossed paths in the afternoon heat, she'd hand him a dipper of water, and he'd take it with a look that said more than words ever could. On the third evening, after supper, Susanna took a basket of scraps out to the chickens and left them alone in the kitchen. The lamplight threw long shadows across the floor. Marigold stood at the window, her palm resting on the sill. Silas leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. I saw you watching the bees today, she said. I was wondering if you liked the work. She turned her head just enough to glance back at him. It's quiet, and it doesn't ask questions. He came a step closer. I've known quiet that felt like a burden. Yours doesn't. Marigold reached for the lamp wick, turned it down a little. There's things I've kept packed so tight inside, I can't even tell if they're heavy anymore. Or just part of me. I don't expect you to lay it all out. She looked at him fully then, her eyes steady. But you would listen if I did. Silas nodded. Always. She took in a breath, one of those deep, careful ones that feels like drawing up water from a dry well. There was a boy, she said. Before I married. We were young. He was kind in that nervous way boys sometimes are. But he got caught up in something foolish, cards, maybe, or some traveling show that passed through. He vanished before I could stop him. Silas didn't speak. I don't know why I thought of him just now. Maybe because you remind me of him. Not in the way you look, but the way you don't hurry your words. Like you're not afraid of leaving silence sitting between us. He shifted, his boots scraping softly on the wood. I never found it useful to fill quiet with noise. Marigold met his gaze. Neither did he. That's probably why I loved him once. There was no tremble in her voice, no wistful softness. Just truth, laid out plain. Silas took another step, close enough now that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. You don't owe me anything from before. She tilted her head, but I might want to offer it. He reached out then, slow, deliberate, and touched her wrist just once, just enough that his fingers met the pulse there. He let them rest a moment, then dropped his hand. I came west looking for land, he said. Something with trees and a creek, enough space to settle down quiet. But the truth is, I didn't know what I was really after until I saw you bend over that wheel. Her breath caught, not from surprise this time, but from recognition. I've never been someone's end goal, she said. Just a stop along the way. You're the only place I've wanted to stay. They stood that way, neither moving, the low hiss of the lamp the only sound. Outside, the chickens rustled in their roost, and a whip-poor-will called out once, twice. Marigold touched the edge of the table, grounding herself. If you stayed here, if you stayed with me, it wouldn't be easy. I don't fall into love like some do. I take time. Silas nodded. Then I'll take time with you. She stepped forward, closing the last of the space between them, and rested her forehead lightly against his shoulder. Not seeking comfort, just accepting it. I think you should build that home here, she whispered. He wrapped one arm around her back, steady and sure. With you in it. She nodded against him. When Susanna returned from the yard, she found them standing by the empty hearth, the light low, their shadows long and quiet against the wall. She didn't say a word, just set down the basket and smiled into the stillness. That night, Marigold didn't sleep in the shed, and Silas didn't sleep in the house. But something between them had settled like a foundation laid deep into firm ground. They would plant roots, not promises. And they would grow slow, like bees building combs stronger with every passing day. The summer deepened. Each morning began with the hive yard humming and the scent of wildflower honey clinging faintly to Marigold's skin. She no longer hesitated at the work. Her hands, once used to wagon grease and rough wood, now handled beeswax and smoker bellows with calm precision. Susanna, ever pragmatic, had given over 2 hives to her care by week's end and hadn't once taken them back. Silas spent his daylight hours in the low pasture east of the house, clearing stones from a plot the sisters had never bothered with. He'd claimed it wordlessly, set a crude stake line, and begun turning earth with a borrowed plow. No one asked what he was planting yet, but he worked like a man with a vision. One evening, Marigold brought him a jar of cool well water as he rested beside the fence line. His shirt was dark with sweat at the collar and shoulders, and his hands were caked with soil. She passed him the jar, and he drank without looking up. "You ever had land of your own before?" she asked, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. He wiped his mouth on the back of his wrist. "Not that held me. Drifted more than I stayed. Thought that's what I wanted. And now," Silas leaned back against the post, exhaling through his nose. "Now I want to see what it's like to build something that doesn't blow over when the wind shifts." "I'm not easy ground," she said, voice even. "I've learned to work around rocks." She crouched beside him, elbows on her knees, eyes on the horizon's edge. "You planning to ask Susanna about that parcel?" "I already did," he said. "Yesterday. She said if you agreed, she'd give me the back acre. Said it floods in spring, but grows good squash come August." Marigold looked down at her hands, then out across the field where the light stretched long and gold. "And if I didn't agree? I'd still stay, but I wouldn't build." She nodded slowly, fingers curling around a tuft of grass. "She told me once there's no point planting something if you're not willing to tend it through the lean months." "I'm willing." They sat like that until the shadows grew long and the first cool breath of night crept in from the west. When they rose, it was together, and neither of them remarked on the way their shoulders brushed as they walked side by side toward the house. That night, Marigold stitched a new curtain for the back room. She didn't need to, but her hands were restless with something she hadn't named yet. Silas lingered in the doorway, watching the thread move through the fabric. "Are you planning to stay in the shed long?" she asked without looking up. He didn't answer right away. "I'll stay wherever you need me. You sleep with your boots beside the cot. I like to be ready." She tied off the thread, set her needle aside. "You don't have to be ready with me." He crossed the room, knelt before her, and placed his calloused hand gently over hers. "I know." Her heart didn't race. It steadied. "I want you in my house," she said, voice low. "Not as a guest, as someone who belongs there." Silas searched her eyes, not for permission, but for certainty. Whatever he found, it was enough. "I'll bring my things in the morning." She stood, and he followed. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The promise between them was already made, not with words, but with every quiet act that had led them to this moment. Outside, the bees had gone still in their boxes, the air thick with the scent of pine and warm earth. Tomorrow, there'd be planting to finish and the first combs to harvest. But tonight, there was nothing to do but rest, together, in the house that would now hold both their names. September brought a softness to the air, the kind that slipped in before dawn and stayed until the sun warmed the earth again. The cottonwoods shifted from green to gold in quiet stages, and the bees moved slower now, their days shorter, their work more deliberate. The hive boxes stood heavy with honey, and Marigold moved among them with practiced calm, her veil loose, her steps unhurried. Inside the house, Silas had taken to rising early, lighting the stove before the rest of the house stirred. He whittled a little in the mornings, sitting on the back steps with a pine block in hand, soft curls of wood falling around his boots. The shed now held tools and seed sacks instead of a cot, and his boots, worn and dusted, sat beside hers under the bed they shared. One afternoon, as Marigold strained the last jar of honey from the comb, Silas stepped in from the porch carrying a folded piece of parchment. His thumb rested along the crease, his face unreadable. "That came from the post rider," he said, setting it on the table. She dried her hands on the cloth at her waist, eyes on the envelope. "Your name on it?" He nodded. "My brother's hand." She unfolded it carefully, the wax seal already broken. As she read, her brow furrowed. "He's asking you home?" she asked. "He's asking if I still plan to file the claim on the land near Cotton Creek. It's been sitting empty since our uncle passed. What'll you tell him?" Silas leaned his hands on the table, fingers spread. "That I've already planted something worth keeping." She met his eyes, something deeper than relief passing between them. "You don't miss it? The old homestead. I never took to the hills like he did. Always felt like I was living someone else's life there. What I've got here that came from my own hands." Marigold folded the letter slowly. "He'll understand. Maybe not at first, but he'll respect it." She nodded and slipped the paper into the drawer beneath the bread tin, where things worth keeping found their place. Later that week, Susanna brought down a bolt of muslin and asked Marigold if she'd stitch a new set of curtains for the parlor. "The light's changing," she said. "Feels like time to freshen things." Marigold set up her sewing by the kitchen window, where she could hear Silas working the soil behind the house. He was building a trellis against the fence, his movements slow and easy. She watched him fit each slat, his back straight, the line of his jaw caught in profile. "You thinking of planting beans?" she asked when she brought him water. "Maybe grapes," he said. "My mother used to tend a vine along the barn. I remember the way it smelled when the fruit came in." "Never had grapes that weren't dried or boiled down," she said, smiling. "Then I'll see if I can change that." Marigold reached for the hammer he'd set down and held it out. "You've got a good eye for straight lines." He took it from her, their fingers brushing. "You've built straighter things than I ever have." "I've rebuilt," she said. "That's a different kind of knowing." In October, the town held its fall gathering, a small affair with music, roast meat, and a harvest table set up in the clearing near the church. Marigold wore a dress Susanna helped her alter, soft blue cotton with a lace collar that had belonged to their mother. Silas wore a clean white shirt, his sleeves rolled but cuffs buttoned. They arrived together but said little, content to stand with plates in hand, watching the sun dip behind the hills in layered gold. An older couple from the edge of town paused beside them. The man tipped his hat to Silas. "You the one planting squash in the lane pasture?" Silas nodded. "Planning to try winter beans next." The man's wife smiled at Marigold. "He's put in roots, then?" "I'd say so," Marigold said. Later that evening, as the fiddles played and children chased each other between fireflies, Silas held his hand out. "Will you?" Marigold looked at the dancers, a lazy circle, boots brushing dust. "I haven't danced since Kansas." "Neither have I." She slid her hand into his, and they stepped into the ring of lantern light, not graceful, not practiced, but steady. He led with care, his hand at her back light as breath, and she let herself follow the rhythm. The music wasn't perfect. Neither were they. But something warm settled in her chest as they moved, something that felt like belonging. That night, they walked home along the road lined in frost-silvered grass, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. The moon was low, their shadows long but close together. "I never thought I'd feel at ease again," she said. "You don't have to hold your breath anymore." She stopped just before the gate, turned to him. "You've given me things I didn't know could come back." "You gave them first," he said. "I just stayed long enough to see them take root." They stepped over the threshold of the house together. The fire was still warm, the bees quiet in their boxes, and the land, that good Wyoming earth, rested under a sky wide with stars. Spring came early the next year. The grapevine took to the trellis, each leaf unfurling with pale green promise. The hives wintered well, and Marigold added 2 more boxes before April. Silas built a bench beneath the cottonwoods, where they sat in the evenings, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. They married in late May, a quiet morning with only Susanna, the preacher, and the wind to witness it. Marigold wore her mother's pin at her collar. Silas wore the same shirt he'd danced in. They signed the paper, said the words, and when it was done, he kissed her hand before her mouth. They never left Lander. They didn't need to. Together, they built a life that held steady through storms and seasons, a life rooted in work and warmth, in slow mornings and shared harvests. And love not hurried, not loud, but deep as earth and just as lasting.